Alrighty, welcome to episode 262. So today's episode is one that was kind of not on a whim, but like I found out about the content matter yesterday, and I thought long and hard about it, and I was like, okay, I gotta do justice by it. So if you see my Instagram reel, you know what I'm talking about. But for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about this bad boy right here, this document I'm holding in my hand. It's from the Department of Homeland Security. It's unclassified, and I will put the link to it in the podcast description. It's called Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate, Fueling Resurgence in Radicalization and Recruitment. It's an assessment put out by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in 2009 when Barack Obama just came into office. So this entire thing shows what they consider to be right-wing extremism. The entire thing is outlined to be what they believe is a right-wing extremist. So the first page starts with the scope. It's right here for those of my my video listeners. It's right here. It says here 7th of April 2009. Excuse me, slamming the mic around. Federal efforts to influence domestic public opinion. There's a whole paragraph, but I'm going to read you the highlighted parts. Federal efforts to influence domestic public opinion must be conducted in an overt and transparent manner, clearly identifying United States government sponsorship. So what they're doing here is they're admitting to propaganda campaigns to combat what they consider right-wing extremism. So they're saying we need a massive propaganda effort to shut down what we believe is right-wing extremism. So the Department of Homeland Security has no specific information that domestic right-wing terrorists are currently planning acts of violence. The economic downturn and the election of the first African-American president present unique drivers for right-wing radicalization and recruitment. Nevertheless, the consequences of a prolonged economic downturn, including real estate foreclosures, unemployment, and an inability to obtain credit, could create a fertile recruiting environment for right-wing extremists. While I do understand, and listen, adverse conditions in a society create revolutionaries and extremists and all different types of political outcomes. But to just say that it only presents a risk of right-wing extremism is incredibly juvenile and one-sided. As this article goes on, it shows, this assessment goes on, I believe that the writers of it and those at the DHS at the time believe that the only form of extremism in the country is right-wing. So extremism is just right-wing, not from the left, the center, or from a religious point of view. So they basically, one of the other things they focus on, right, one of the first outlier of what makes a right-wing extremist is the possible passage of new restrictions on firearms and the return of military veterans facing significant challenges reintegrating into their communities could lead to the potential emergence of terrorist groups or lone wolf extremists capable of carrying out violent attacks. So they're saying that those that are upset about restrictions on firearms could potentially become right-wing extremists and terrorists. So by restricting rights leading to resistance, yeah? Of course, people are going to resist laws they find unjust. Of course, people are going to, stand up to something they think is tyrannical. But, and one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, of course. But, looking at this, anyone that owns a firearm or is upset about the firearm laws is liable to be looked at as someone that is a terrorist and as someone that is, against the United States, an enemy of the United States. I mean, that's insane, especially because it's, written in our Constitution, we have the right to bear arms. Naturally, it would be, people are either going to resist it or complain about it or want to petition their congressman to change those laws. So, the fact that they said that passing these, and this is what's insane too, they said that passing restrictions on firearms could lead to the emergence of terrorist groups or lone wolf extremists. Why would you continue passing these laws then if that's going to be the outcome? I thought the whole point of passing these laws to restrict firearms was to prevent that, not increase it. And then they also say something, and this is really fucked up. They say military veterans face significant challenges reintegrating into their communities and could lead to potential emergence of terrorist groups or lone wolf extremists. So fucking fix the VA. Give these people, these heroes that just came back from Afghanistan and Iraq, the care they need so they don't bug out and potentially kill someone or join these groups because they feel alienated and alone and they suffer from PTSD. So, maybe provide more care to these people. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. You want to solve the problem, maybe help veterans reintegrate. And this is another thing too. They define right-wing extremism very broadly, and they say this actually in the footnote of the article. They say verbatim: right-wing extremism in the United States can be broadly divided into those groups, movements, and adherents that are primarily hate-based, based on the hatred of particular religions, racial or ethnic groups, and those that are, and this was something I really want to highlight to you guys, mainly anti-government, rejecting federal authority in favor of state or local authority, or rejecting government authority entirely. That is very fucking broad. There are a lot of groups in this country and a lot of people in this country that really don't like the federal government. There's communists, socialists, anarchists, trade unionists, black supremacists, black nationalists, regular people that are just pissed off that they have to pay their 38% of their income every year to the federal government. And it may also include groups and individuals that are dedicated to a single issue, such as opposition to abortion or immigration. So you could be a Democrat in everything else, but just really be passionate about wanting to have stricter immigration, and you're a right-wing extremist. You could be a Democrat and everything else. And, hey, listen, I don't really ride with that abortion. You're a right-wing extremist. Now, listen, I am pro-abortion. I am pro-choice. But I don't think you're a right-wing extremist because you hold the view that you don't like abortion. That doesn't make you an extremist. That's just an opinion you have. So this document lobs a lot of Americans in the same category. It puts them in the same category as terrorists for just having different viewpoints, for being upset that there's restrictions on their Second Amendment, for people, coming home from Iraq or Afghanistan and feeling alienated. Those are now considered potential terrorists. If you want to mitigate these threats, help people. And they literally said, the reason we're having this potential, we could have this potential growth is because military veterans are alienated and they're coming back from overseas. So maybe stop fucking sending people overseas to wars we don't need to be in. And two, stop passing restrictions on firearms if you're saying that restrictions on firearms are not working and lead to the potential for more violence. This document from 2009 just said that all gun control has the potential to lead to more gun violence. That's what this document from the Department of Homeland Security says. Let's go to the next page. The high volume of purchases and stockpiling of weapons and ammunition by right-wing extremists in anticipation of restrictions and bans in some parts of the country continue to be a primary concern to law enforcement. So again, don't restrict it. And then you got to understand too, like in the shooting community, one, this document doesn't even outline what a lot of ammunition is. Is it 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 rounds? Or is it 1,000 rounds? Because I'll tell you what, one day at the range is 200 rounds. Then you need some ammo to defend your home, maybe 50 to 100 rounds. And then you need to earmark some for if you go hunting. So maybe another like 20, 30 rounds to get your rifle set in. And then the rest is just for you to enjoy if you want to go to a couple of trips on the range. And 200 is very, very conservative. I try to stick to 200 rounds when I go shooting. I could easily shoot 500 rounds in a day. You give me 4 hours at the range, 500 rounds goes out the window like that. And the thing is, people stockpile ammunition because it's expensive. It's like, the more restrictions you put on guns and ammunition, the more people are going to want to buy it because it's going to be more difficult to get. So it's going to be harder to enjoy their hobby or to protect themselves. It's not always for this nefarious reason that they're trying to make it out to be. Okay? So, and then it's also fear of missing out, right? That drives a lot of purchases. So in New York in 2022, when they had like the deadline for semi-automatics to become licensed objects, meaning like there was a grace period of 3 months from May to September 1st where semi-automatic rifles were allowed to be purchased without a permit, and then after September 1st you needed a permit to buy semi-automatic rifles. So everyone went to the gun store. Any gun store you went to on Long Island, the shelves were cleared of AR-15s, SKSs, AK-47s, M1 Garands, M1 carbines, PC-9 carbines. Anything that was semi-automatic was just wiped clean in the shelves. All the lower receivers for the AR-15s were gone. There were so many NICS background checks and gun sales going through the state. It was crazy. And a lot of people bought them because they know how difficult it is to just get a pistol license in the state, let alone a semi-automatic license. Forget it. You're going to be waiting years. As of now, a pistol license to get fully licensed from the day you apply for your interview, you get your interview, to the day you get your license is a year to 2 years. So in the state of New York. So a lot of people were like, we don't want to wait that long to get these guns, dude. Like, I just want to get the thing to shoot it, and I want to keep it because it has historical value, or because it's cool, or because I feel more defended with it, or because I want to use it for hunting. You know, a lot of people did that for fear of missing out reasons, not because they wanted to stockpile ammunition, and because of a revolutionary end. So if you stockpile weapons, meaning if you panic buy, right? So say, you think that there's going to be more restrictions coming, or you think that there's going to be, like, on guns or ammunition, and you buy, 1,000 to 2,000 rounds of ammunition and a new gun, or maybe 2 new guns, you might be seen as stockpiling guns and ammunition, and you'll be considered a right-wing extremist, even though you really just don't want to deal with the pain in the ass of having to deal with going to an FFL instead of having the ammo shipped to your door. So you'd rather just order a bunch of ammo in bulk so you don't got to deal with it, because the rules always keep changing, and you don't want to have to wait 2 years to get the semi-automatic rifle that you could have just enjoyed for most of your life anyway. So you were just like, fuck it, I'll buy 2 of them now, so that way I don't have to wait 2 years to get a license and go through all the bullshit again of getting references and getting an interview and paying money to the government so that way you can actually apply for the license. Oh, which, by the way, is over $100 to apply for the pistol course. Not the pistol course, the pistol licensing bureau. So there's fees involved with it, and it just takes a very long time. So, if you do anything to accelerate the process of you getting a weapon or a set of ammunition before having to deal with these things, before having to deal with these restrictions, you're a right-wing extremist. Let's see. This is now the current economic and political climate of portion of the document. So this is page 3 of 9, okay? There was a shooting, right? So there was a shooting on April 4th, 2009 in Pittsburgh. And this is what they said was the incident and the motivating factor. And then I'm going to get into what the news articles I read on the story was. The alleged gunman's reaction reportedly was influenced by his racist ideology and belief in anti-government conspiracy theories related to gun confiscations, citizen detention camps, and a Jewish-controlled one-world government. So this dude, his name was Richard Poplowski, and he lived with his mom. He was like 22 years old. His mom was 41, and they got into a big fight, and she called the police. And he was like, fuck, the cops are here. So he starts shooting at the cops, and he kills 3 cops. And he ends up surrendering and then gets arrested. They're saying that he did that because his political views made him think that the cops were coming for him or something like that, which doesn't make any sense. He just didn't want to go to jail, and he was like, fuck it, I'm shooting back. There are so many cases of that, of people resisting arrest because they don't want to go to fucking jail. Not because they're Nazis, but because they don't want to get butt-fucked in prison. No-brainer. I mean, that's why people resist arrest, by either just trying to run away or doing what this guy unfortunately did. So they're trying to make this guy out like he's a neo-Nazi. That's why he shot the cops, because he's a neo-Nazi, when he just got into an argument with his mom. He didn't want to go to jail, and he shot some officers, and now he's facing the death penalty if he didn't get executed already. He was, I think he got charged with the death penalty in 2011, or given it, whatever. But they're spinning this around now to make it seem like he's an extremist. Now, this whole document has been basically taking very innocuous things or silly little quirks that, like, people do and turning it into right-wing extremism. Like panic buying during, the 2020, riots, right? There was, like, lines out the door at all the gun stores. Black and white buying guns, right? A lot of black gun owners during that period of time. That wasn't seen as extremism. At least, for black people it wasn't, or maybe it was, but, it shouldn't be seen as extremism. They're just trying to protect themselves. And that actually gets addressed later in this pamphlet, specifically, not in racialized terms, but in general terms, mass buying of guns, and that shouldn't make you a conspiracy theorist. We also have the exploiting economic downturn sentiment. So right-wing extremist chatter on the internet continues to focus on the economy, the perceived loss of U.S. jobs in the manufacturing, construction centers, and home foreclosures. Anti-Semitic extremists attribute these losses to a deliberate conspiracy theory conducted by a cabal of Jewish financial elites. These accusatory tactics are employed to draw new recruits into the groups, blah, 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 blah. So they're saying that because you're upset about your economy failing, your loss of a job, and your manufacturing construction centers halting, you're a right-wing extremist. Now, the anti-Semitic stuff I get, because if you think it's contributed by a Jewish cabal, that's one thing. But it is run by financial elites. The whole thing is run by financial elites. It's just, not just Jews that run it. It's just they're rich people. That's really it. We're going to get more into economics later. The historical presidential election. This is still on page 3, by the way, and we're 15 minutes in. Many right-wing extremists are antagonistic towards the new presidential administration and its perceived stance on a range of issues, including immigration and citizenship, the expansion of social programs to minorities, and restrictions on firearms ownership and usage. So here's what really blows my mind about that, right? Many right-wing extremists are antagonistic towards the new presidential administration. Who isn't antagonistic to the new presidential? So that means if I'm antagonistic towards a presidential administration, I'm right-wing? And its perceived stance on a range of issues, including immigration and citizenship. So if I want, more secure borders and just creating a streamlined path to citizenship instead of what we have now, where we have to wait 15 years, am I a right-wing extremist? The expansion of social programs to minorities. If you're getting pissed off about that, all right, maybe you're a little racist. Now, it's one thing if you don't want social programs to be expanded because you don't believe in that and you believe people should fend for themselves. That's different. That doesn't make you a right-wing extremist. That just means you don't like that. You're not an extreme. The thing is like some of these positions are right-wing, but like they're not extreme positions. They're being made to look extreme. And it's not even saying like you could hold, opinions like this as an extremist, but like what are you doing to be extreme in them? Like, are you ending immigration? Are you banning minorities from having social services? Are you mandating the use of firearms? That's a radical position where it's like you have to own, you are legally required to own a firearm now. Regardless of anything, you must own a firearm, which, I'm totally for. That's extreme. I'll admit it, though. But this isn't extreme. Let's see. And then revisiting the 1990s. So during the 1990s, there was a growth of actual right-wing extremism, kind of. And there was a resurgence in the neo-Nazi movement, and they were armed, they had compounds, and it was kind of crazy. A lot of people refer to Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge as incidences of white supremacy. Ruby Ridge, what happened was there was a dude, his wife, and his 2 children living in a log cabin in the middle of Idaho, and there was an undercover deputy that went to the dude and was like, because I guess they suspected him of something, a firearms law violation, and they were like, hey, it was an ATF agent too, and that's a whole other thing for another day. But basically, the dude was like, hey, I'll give you like $50 if you just saw like the end of my shotgun off. I just want it to be shorter. And the guy was like, okay, I could use $50. So we did that. And then the ATF, without a warrant, presented to the, I don't know if they had a warrant or if they didn't present it, but they camped out in, around the guy's property, and they were walking around with a gun. And the boy, who was like 14, Randy Weaver, saw these guys on the property and was like, hey, what are you doing? And then raised his rifle up, and then he got shot. And then they started just opening fire on everyone. The wife ended up going by the window. She had her baby in her arms, and she got her head blown off while she was just holding the baby. She wasn't even holding a gun. And then the guy that they were trying to interrogate ended up getting killed. So they basically just killed an entire family, for, really without warning. I mean, they could have arrested them normally and just arrested the guy in question normally by walking up to him and saying, "Hey, we caught you sawing off a shotgun and giving it back to this undercover deputy. Like, we're going to have to take you in, blah, 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 blah." But no, they decided to camp outside the guy's house with snipers and just pick everyone off. So that's basically one of the things that happened. The other thing was Waco, Texas. I don't really know much about Waco. Basically, it was like a religious cult, and they were chilling on their compound, and the ATF was like, "You guys have guns, and illegal guns at that, and a stockpile. You're radical. So we're going to kill everyone inside of your compound and burn everyone alive." So that is what happened. So that was the 1990s. Oh, and then there was the Oklahoma City bombings, which was not very baller. So that was the 1990s for right-wing extremism. So revisiting the 1990s, because that wasn't that long ago in 2009. Prominent among these themes were the militia movements. So that was the big thing, too. The militia movement was a group of people that were forming a new army to enact a revolution similar to the one in 1776. So they claimed. Prominent among these themes were the militia movement's opposition to gun control efforts, criticism of free trade agreements, particularly those with Mexico, and highlighting perceived government infringement on civil liberties, as well as white supremacist longstanding exploitation of social issues such as abortion, interracial crimes, and same-sex marriage. So this is what's interesting too, right? So you're considered one of these extremists, right? Like you're considered a armed terrorist if you criticize the free trade agreements, particularly those with Mexico, and speak out against perceived government infringement on civil liberties. And if you're against gun control, and you're also, now here's the thing too, right? Like abortion, you focus on interracial crimes. I can understand the interracial crimes argument. That, is like, okay, you're being, now it's one thing if you want to challenge a narrative and you're actually doing a research paper and say, actually, you know what, there's not really that much difference. Crime is just crime. I understand that. But if you're trying to prove like an area, like that the Aryan race is more inclined to not be criminal, then you're a fucking racist. I mean, obviously. And then same-sex marriage. You can be against same-sex marriage and not be a right-wing extremist. Extremism requires a lot of, like, you can't, like, there's not really one thing you can check off that would put you in a right-wing extremist camp, except, like, yeah, like, if you were like, yeah, I believe we should, I believe the Holocaust was right. If you said that, like, yeah, you're a right-wing extremist. That's a very extreme point of view. If you're like, yeah, you know what? Women shouldn't be allowed to work. We should deny them the right to vote. That's fucking extreme. That's a very right-wing thing. But if you're against same-sex marriage, traditionally that's been like something that there hasn't been like an open movement for that. There was always an open movement to get, not always, but there was always a push throughout human history to get women involved in the world and raise them up to the status of men. There's always been that push. That's not a foreign concept. There were a lot of people, they didn't even really, they thought homosexuality was barely a thing. They thought it was like something of the devil back in like, 1980. You know what I mean? That's a whole other episode, LGBTQA development and stuff throughout history. But being against same-sex marriage doesn't mean you're like a right-wing extremist. It just means you're kind of a dick and maybe a little ignorant, but not an extremist. I wouldn't put a swastika on you. And again, like abortion, again, totally pro-choice here. But if you're against abortion, you're not a right-wing extremist. You just might not really jive with that. Or your conception of abortion might be different. There's some people after like 2 or 3 months, they're like, I don't think it would be right for me to get an abortion. So I'm keeping the child. Or they plan accordingly, that doesn't make them extremists. Or there's just people, they're like, I'm very religious and I just don't, I do not believe in abortion, but you're not forcing it on other people. The only thing you may voice is like in your vote. And if your candidate happens to be against abortion, then hey, double win for you, right? But like, you're not going to Planned Parenthoods and bombing them or threatening to kill people for getting abortions. Like, that's extreme. If you're threatening violence or really violence, honestly, yeah. I mean, like, that makes you an extremist when you threaten violence. But this isn't saying that. It's not saying and using violence to exploit social issues such as abortion, interracial crime, and same-sex marriage. It's just saying if you are critical of this, then you are an extremist. Then we get to the economic and hardship and extremism point of it. So prominent anti-government conspiracy theories have incorporated aspects of an impending economic collapse. So apparently that makes me a conspiracy theorist if I believe there's an impending economic collapse. Conspiracy theories involving declarations of martial law, impending civil strife, or racial conflict, suspension of the U.S. Constitution, and the creation of citizen detention camps often incorporate aspects of a failed economy. So let's see. Let's actually go through. So fast forward, right? This is 2009. We're in 2023. Let's see what happened here. Boop, 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 boop. The economy almost did collapse during COVID. Interest rates are also up again. Not that it's collapsing, but it's not great. Declarations of martial law. Do we not remember the summer of 2020? That's all I'm going to say. Impending civil strife or racial conflict. The summer of 2020. Suspension of the U.S. Constitution. That was not suspended yet. It's been violated a lot, but not suspended. And the creation of citizen detention camps often incorporate aspects of a failed economy. So again, like I referenced multiple times in this podcast, there was a New York congressman that actively suggested imprisoning those suspected, not congressmen, assemblymen, suspected of, having COVID. So if you were suspected of having COVID, not just had it, suspected of it, you would be detained indefinitely in the camps. Fortunately, it didn't go through the legislature, but still terrifying. And there was also a study that I saw by CNBC or Fox or something where like 40% or 50% of Democrats that responded said that, people that had COVID should go to special facilities. So that's a little concerning. So that seems to be a little right. Now, I know that with this, because I've also studied, the neo-Nazi movement in this country. Racial conflict, impending civil strife, and, the citizen detention camps would come in the form of FEMA, and they would utilize a natural disaster, and they'd be like, oh, everyone get to the camps, we're just protecting you, and then they kill you. The big thing back in 2011 was the mass purchases of these big black containers by FEMA, and they were freaking out. Everyone was freaking out in the Tea Party because they were like, oh, my God, that's enough to put 6 bodies in. And if you multiply that by the amount of orders, that's 20 million people and blah, 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 or something like that. And that never happened. But what did happen was a lot of civil strife. And then, of course, racial conflict, right? Thinking like race war. Okay. But here's the thing, if your conspiracy theory involved some of these theories were plausible too, where it's like, in the event of a disaster or a disease, people are going to be imprisoned and the Constitution's going to get suspended, and then it's going to lead to, riots and unrest because we're racially divided in this country. That's not really a conspiracy theory. That's really just facts. I mean, that actually happened in 2020. Like this is a playbook for 2020, almost to a T. And then it goes on to talk about anti-government conspiracy theories and end times prophecies could motivate extremist individual groups to stockpile food, ammunition, and weapons. How does stockpiling food make you an extremist? Maybe, you're just over-prepared, but, I don't think you're an extremist. You're just trying to keep yourself safe and alive. Ammunition and weapons. I mean, we saw a lot of stockpiling during COVID. We saw a lot of stockpiling during, 2020 when all the riots were happening and the unrest. That's not totally unhinged behavior. At least there was a purpose with that. But, and I know that I'm looking at an almost 12-year-old document through hindsight. So like, don't think, I'm not like trying to be like that guy here and say, oh, this is, da, da, da. I don't know. But basically, I thought it was really interesting because a lot of this, at least, would make a lot of people I know an extremist. And then also like this one's a footnote in the document. This footnote on page 4. High unemployment, however, has the potential to lead to alienation. That's a Marxist thing right there. So Marx said that capitalism creates alienation because people are separated from their work, their community, and themselves, and it creates a sense of utter loneliness that is filled only through consuming and participating in capitalist production. So that's straight out of Marxism 101. The German Institute for Economic Research there was a study from the German Institute for Economic Research in 2007 showing that there's a strong association between a parent's unemployment status and the formation of right-wing extremist beliefs in their children, specifically xenophobia and anti-democratic ideals. So I can see, so yes, economic conditions do create extreme reactions in children, be it attraction to gang violence, political violence, or interpersonal violence. That's absolutely true. I don't think that it's just right wing. I think it could be left wing too. Anything that is extreme and shows intense care to that child will bring that child with them. It's just whatever reaches them first. Xenophobia, sure. Anti-democratic ideals. I mean, that kind of goes in. So that's like the only thing that I could say, like, in this, out of 4 pages, maybe this is like the second thing that could be seen as like, okay, I could see that being like plausible. Like, that's plausible. Out of 4 pages from the Department of Homeland Security, ladies and gentlemen. This is their illegal immigration section, page 5 of 9. Right-wing extremists were concerned during the 1990s with the perception that illegal immigrants were taking away American jobs through their willingness to work at significantly lower wages. They also opposed free trade agreements, arguing that these arrangements resulted in Americans losing jobs to countries such as Mexico. So that's true, because that's exactly what the free trade agreements did. And illegal immigrants do work for less. That's why the trope of Mexicans waiting outside a Home Depot at 7 in the morning to get picked up for work so they get paid $100 a day is a real thing. And it's true. People do exploit illegal immigrants because they are willing to work for less. Because our less is the most they've ever made in their lives. And then, losing jobs to other countries. I mean, outsourcing's a real thing. A lot of people are upset about that because guess what? We have to fucking work to make rent. Not everyone can be a coder. Not everyone can do what I do. Not everyone should either. We need bricklayers, coal miners, oilmen, tankers, and fucking electricians and manufacturing jobs. Not everyone's meant to work in retail or fast food either. That fucking sucks. Sometimes most people would like a nice factory job where, they work a 12-hour shift, they get some overtime, they get protected for the rest of their life in old age or in injury, and their kids might be able to have maybe a little bit of that life too, and they get into the union. So, yeah, a lot of people are pissed off, especially communities that relied heavily on this blue-collar labor that got exported out of the country. So then we have, it continues, right? Goes to debates over appropriate, this is more on like immigration. Debates over appropriate immigration levels and enforcement policy generally fall within the realm of protected political speech under the First Amendment. Fine. But in some cases, anti-immigration or strident pro-enforcement fervor has been directed against specific groups and has the potential to turn violent. So, this document gives examples when it wants to give examples. When it came to, I forgot what it was. I think it was maybe later in this document, actually. But there was like once or twice where it gave like a specific example or a reference, like the shooting of the officers, right? It gave that example as, current, justification for current economic and political climate. Or it talked about was it key findings? It talked about the Oklahoma City bombing on page 2, but we're on page 5, and it just said that in some cases, anti-immigration or strident pro-enforcement fervor has been directed against specific groups and has potential to turn violent. And there's no example. There's no example provided. So it really shows that, from the DHS's perspective, they said a key word here, right? It's a key word. It says, in some cases, a key phrase, in some cases. So it means that the extremists are a very small minority and that most people just want, more secure borders when they do talk about this. And strident pro-enforcement fervor. Now, anti-immigration, when they say anti-immigration, does that mean they don't want immigrants in the country? If you don't want immigrants in the country, then I could see that as like, okay, that's very extreme. If you want to ban immigration and all immigration, that's very extreme. Strident pro-enforcement. We are so pro-enforcement. Get them all out of the country. Let them come back legally. I think that's bold. I wouldn't say that's extreme. I think, when it comes to the limitations of actually enforcing such a policy, they might tone it down a bit and just say, okay, no new people could come in because we can't find all these fucking people. Like, once they're gone from the border, that's it. Has been directed against specific groups. Latinos? I mean, like, it's not, they're not going over here hate criming these people. They're just saying, hey, they're all coming from the southern border. We should close down the southern border and really enforce it. Because not a lot of people come through Canada. Do people come through Canada illegally? Sure. Should they? No. But all the sentiment is down on the southern border because that's where all the drugs are coming in from. That's where all the people are coming in from. That's where all the gang members are coming in from. That's where our national security threats are coming from. So I can understand that. But I don't think that, and it says, has the potential to turn violent. Anything has the potential to turn violent. You just said that when people infringe upon, your rights, it has the potential to turn violent. Anything could turn violent. But the thing is, there's no example of that here. They don't list an example of those certain cases. Because the cases they did reference with the bombings and the shootings, those are not common. And then even the shooting example they gave, it wasn't even a real example of right-wing extremism. The guy may have been a right-wing extremist, genuinely, maybe. But if what they were saying about the guy was true, then he'd most likely be a right-wing conspiracy theorist talking about a Jewish cabal and the Jews are bad and like New World Order. Okay, maybe he is a conspiracy theorist. But even so, that doesn't mean he should be watched because the guy bugged out when he was about to get arrested. He didn't bug out with, him and his friends trying to wage a political revolution like they're claiming is the big problem here. The guy was really angry, young and stupid, and he had a gun, and he was like, I could go to jail or I could go out like a hero. And then he still went to jail, and now he's probably going to get executed. So, fucking idiot, number one. But number two, it wasn't what they made it seem. So who even knows if what they're accusing the guy of is actually as true as, this paper. Now what are we going to see here? We got legislative and judicial drivers. Many right-wing extremist groups perceive recent gun control legislation as a threat to their right to bear arms, and in response of increased weapons and ammunition stockpiling, as well as renewed participation in paramilitary training exercises. So let's recap this, right? Perceiving recent gun control legislation is a threat to their right to bear arms. It is. They are threats and they are threats to the right to bear arms. Literally, in today's day and age, the Democrats they actually have said, we are coming for your AR-15. We are coming for your AK-47. Words of Gavin Newsom. Beto O'Rourke, excuse me. Beto O'Rourke is trying to put another amendment into the U.S. Constitution. Not Beto O'Rourke. Gavin Newsom's trying to put the 28th Amendment into the Constitution to severely limit the Second Amendment and essentially render it null and void. Let's see what else. So this makes, for those that, perceive this gun control legislation as a threat and increase weapons and ammunition that they own, they're potential terrorists. Now, the paramilitary training exercises, what does that mean? That's very vague. Are there people out there with compounds doing military drills and training? Maybe, but even so, I mean, there are definitely maybe like 3 or 4, but like, here's the thing. Don't you want a well-regulated militia? Isn't that like the whole point of what these guys are saying? Like when I talk to anti-gun people and they say, well, what? And they say, well-regulated means well-regulated. Okay, fine. If you're gonna say that, then why can't a group of people get together, train with their buddies for military scenarios, so that way they are ready and they efficient to use their firearms to defend the country from both foreign and domestic enemies? If you want well-regulated, this is one half of the well-regulated part, the training aspect of it. They're training. For what? I don't know, but they're training. So you can't really bust their balls. But at the same time, the paramilitary people, when they say, well-regulated, they also can't bust balls either when they're like, well, then we want to know where your guns are coming from because we believe that that's regulation too. So it's really coming down to defining the well-regulated part in this scenario here. So that creates a new contradiction, which is actually quite fascinating. I'd like to see how both sides fight that one out. But basically, again, if you increase your weapons or ammunition stockpiles when threats to your gun rights come up, you're seen as a right-wing extremist. I know a lot of leftists that own guns and act the same way, or just regular people. So it's actually kind of funny, especially after 2020 when I saw the gun lines open up. That was interesting. Also, another footnote, right? Right-wing extremist hostility towards government was fueled by the implementation of restrictive gun laws. Again, same thing. And this was in the 1990s, where there was a 5-day waiting period for guns from the Brady law, and I think this was out in Ohio. They did this 5-day waiting period prior to purchasing handgun in the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Limited sale of various assault weapons. I think this all got thrown out. But basically, if you opposed 5-day waiting periods and a ban on assault weapons, you were a right-wing extremist. What else do we got? This is page 6. A correlation may exist between the potential passage of gun control legislation and increased hoarding of ammunition, weapons, stockpile, and paramilitary training activities among right-wing extremists. Okay. That is the craziest shit I've ever heard in my life, because if you want to end gun violence, you address the economic concerns that you highlighted on page 3, and then what you're saying is going to happen if you keep restricting guns won't happen. Their major fear is gun control being resisted by buying more shit and training to use that shit. They are concerned with people using force to reinstate their rights. So if you simply don't want that risk of revolution or violence or terrorism happening, just don't pass the fucking law and restrict people. There are other ways to end gun violence. That in World War II and World War I, when people came home with weapons, automatic weapons, grenades, bazookas, all this other shit, there weren't mass shootings. There were not. There just simply were not mass shootings. What changed between now and then? Because there were automatic weapons in the country, not just semi-automatic weapons, automatic weapons. What the fuck happened between 1945, really 1917, and today? What happened? Both right-wing extremists and law-abiding citizens share a belief that rising crime rates attributed to a slumping economy, making the purchase of legitimate firearms a wise move at this time. So now what they're saying is, there's a difference between law-abiding citizens and right-wing extremists. What's the difference? Because I could think of so many people that I've met off the top of my head, or I hear, or I see posting on the internet about it, or, watch their YouTube videos and stuff, and it's like, this is like a lot of fucking people, or people I met just politically, and I'm not a right-wing guy. I was a socialist organizer for years, and even a lot of those people would be considered, on this list, and considered right-wing by this definition. I mean, that's kind of crazy. But now there's a difference that, oh, well, law-abiding citizens share a belief that rising crime rates, are attributed to a slumping economy, and we need guns to protect ourselves. Like, but they just said that, like, you're an extremist for doing something like that in most of this pamphlet. I think that was just to cover their ass. Because debates over constitutional rights are intense and parties on all sides have deeply held sincere but vastly divergent beliefs, violent extremists may attempt to co-opt the debate and use the controversy as a radicalization tool. Extremists can do that. At points of political tension or fracture, it is absolutely important for an extremist to do that. Lenin said that during World War I, revolutionary defeatism was the way to go, and that the perfect time to strike was when the Russian Empire was losing and had enemies all around it, which is when in 1917 the October Revolution was launched immediately after the February Revolution. So, revolutionary defeatism is also encouraging the defeat of the war by workers in Russia sabotaging Russian munitions plants in order to accelerate the loss of the war and thus trigger a socialist revolution to control as much territory as possible before the Germans gobble it up as the Russians kept surrendering or retreating. So that's revolutionary defeatism. That's very radical and extreme and crazy. Well, not crazy, but just very radical and extreme. And, they're over here saying that, like, saying all this other stuff in this document. That's not that radical. I mean, most of this is because it's a constitutional right. Half of this document is focused on gun rights, and it's a constitutional right. This isn't like where it was never a constitutional right, and it's like, why do you have one? It's one thing if it was like they were stockpiling tanks and jets and, like, nuclear bombs. Like, yeah, okay, that makes sense as being an extremist. But, like, I mean, what? They're going to a gun store and buying guns? So they legally bought a gun, and they bought 2 or 3 of them. What's the big fucking deal? What, like, I don't get it. Paranoia of foreign regimes could escalate or... Oh, this is another thing, too. There's a paranoia in right-wing extremists of foreign regimes escalating or being magnified in the event of an economic crisis or military confrontational. So basically, they're afraid of, and a lot of people are, of the United States losing its superpower status and looking weaker on the world stage because they think it's going to open us up to more attacks by foreign adversaries. That's pretty fucking normal and has been U.S. policy for its entire existence to become more powerful and maintain that powerful position so we don't get trampled on by Europe. That is the entire point of U.S. foreign policy, and yet that's extremist now. They also go on to say, right-wing extremists bemoan the decline of U.S. stature, and backing up what I just said, and have focused on themes such as the loss of U.S. manufacturing capability to China and India and Russia, and Russia's control of energy resources and the use of these to pressure other countries, and China's investment in U.S. real estate and corporations as part of subversion strategy. So, if you are upset that the United States is losing its stature internationally, are upset that the United States lost its manufacturing capability and has outsourced it to China, India, and Russia, which 2 of 3 of those countries are our enemies, and also are scared of Russia's control of energy resources, and then also afraid of the use of these resources being used to pressure other countries into doing what they want, and then China's investment in U.S. real estate, buying up corporations and real estate, is an attempt to spy on us. If you are afraid or against all of that, you may be a right-wing extremist. Again, this is the Department of Homeland Security saying this in 2009. Then this is the whole section on disgruntled military veterans, and it's really disgusting. The willingness of a small percentage of military personnel to join extremist groups during the 1990s because they were disgruntled, disillusioned, or suffering from the psychological effects of war is being replicated today. After Operation Desert Shield and Storm in 1990 and 1991, some military veterans, including Timothy McVeigh, who committed the Oklahoma City bombing, joined or associated with right-wing extremist groups. A prominent civil rights organization reported in 2006 that, quote, large numbers of potentially violent neo-Nazi skinheads and other white supremacists are now learning the art of warfare in the U.S. Armed Forces, end quote, and no source, and no name for a civil rights organization, so that's made up. The FBI noted in 2008, in a 2008 report on the white supremacist movement, that some returning military veterans from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have joined extremist groups. And that, okay, from the FBI, might be true, maybe. It does, veterans are susceptible to extremism. That is a fact. Caring for them is, the United States government caring for them is not a fact. And it's evidence that the United States government is not doing an effective job caring for these people because they do this shit. They blow up buildings or they join extremist groups because they feel alienated and alone. And it's the same thing as the kids that grew up in the economically disadvantaged households that end up joining extremist groups in order to find belonging because their life sucks. So stop making people's lives suck and they won't do sucky things. It's quite simple. Mind you, this was the Obama era and, you know, all about the whole like welfare and social utility and social relief and all this shit, and then not releasing it to the people that need it the most, because a lot of these people that they're calling extremists or are afraid or, you know, are disgruntled or angry is because they feel betrayed and feel hurt and left out in the cold, and they just want some support, man. They just want a fucking hug. Give them a fucking hug. This one's on just like, this is more of a continuation, and then the outlook. So, this document, again, can be found online. I'm going to drop it in the podcast link, podcast description. And it's a fascinating read if you want to read it just to you refute any of my claims, or maybe take a read at it, and then maybe you'll have like a different perspective on it, which would be cool. If you do, definitely comment it in either the reviews of the podcast or on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook, or Twitch. It'd be very interesting to get people's perspectives on it. Overall, like, a lot of people that I do know would be considered extremists based on this. Being disgruntled or upset how the war effort is going as a veteran opens you up to being a target for being labeled an extremist. So if you're upset about the foreign policy goals and how the military was used, you're an extremist. Not just someone that was like, oh, hey, you know, I had a different experience and opinion on that matter. So that makes you an extremist. If you're upset about your rights getting taken away, you're an extremist. If you're upset about losing your job, you're an extremist. If you have criticisms of a presidential administration, you're an extremist. If you believe that we should have a secure border and, you know, not just have immigrants just coming in here with no aid or support and just kind of getting dropped in here and being told to figure it out and maybe getting $100 when they first get in, like it's a GTA server, you're an extremist. If you think that, and this is just like the same thing over and over again, if you're afraid of, you know, other countries having control over us because of outsourced labor and energy production, you're an extremist. And this is the funny thing too. A lot of the things that I'm referencing right now, it's not just right wing, because I know I do have a left wing audience, and I will say that, like, y'all, Stalin literally like advocated for some of this shit. In communist China, it was encouraged to own a gun during the revolutionary years. You know, and there was no, you know, immigration was tough in those countries, man. In all the rest of the world, it's very difficult to get into that country and become a citizen, let alone just take a fucking vacation. So, you know, all those people would be considered extremists according to this because they just want a secure border. Now, if you're advocating for violence against, you know, illegal immigrants or legal immigrants, and you're, you know, planning to blow things up and harm people, yeah, you're a fucking extremist. But, like, this isn't saying any of that. This is just saying if you hold these beliefs, you're kind of fucked. So that's very dangerous to think about. And think of it. This is 2009. And And we're seeing an amplified version of this today, and similar themes as well, where you're called an extremist for wanting, better immigration, an extremist for wanting to preserve your gun rights, an extremist for, not wanting to get a COVID vaccine, an extremist for not following mainstream media, an extremist for this and that. And this was motivated by a picture I saw on the internet where it said people that listen to independent media as opposed to mainstream media are considered extremists. I don't know how true, and I was trying to find the source, the assessment that image came from, but that's how I stumbled across this one. And the reason I referenced this today is because it sounds like something that is going on today. This, if you told me this came out this year in 2023, I would believe it 100%. You could almost republish this entire thing, copy and paste this assessment into 2023, and I would believe it. I would believe every damn thing. Maybe update the references a little bit, instead of Waco and Ruby Ridge and the 90s, you said like Sandy Hook and like, rest in peace, or, any of the other mass shootings, then yeah, like this all starts to make fucking sense. Like you could basically copy and paste this and maybe change a couple of things around, and it would be the exact same assessment for a lot of the policy going on today and a lot of reactions to the policy going on today. So things haven't changed. Things have changed, but they haven't changed a lot. Or maybe they didn't change at all. Maybe we just got older. This shows that things are really the same in this country, and the only pause between this document and the restart in 2021 was the Trump presidency, when everyone that made this document was on the defense because they were like, oh shit, this guy's fucking up our painting of average Americans as terrorists. So I genuinely and he was, listen, he painted a lot of left-wing Americans as terrorists too. Don't get me wrong. I may give Trump a lot of credit when it comes to the economics and keeping the country economically stable and globally at prominence. But man, I'll tell you what, well, maybe they not respected prominence, but still, like we were in a position where we could fight and win, especially because we were energy sufficient. But god damn, I mean, he really, if you were a leftist, you were the enemy of the state. He called the media the enemy of the people. He said, if you're not on my side, you're not on any side. He said, Proud Boys, stand by but stand down. What the fuck was that? There's a lot of things he did that were very not good too. Listen, they're both sides, Biden and Trump, they're both sides of the same coin. The government, DHS, whether it's spouting liberal bullshit or conservative bullshit, it's the Department of Homeland Security, and their goal is to make, everyone out to be a potential enemy. That's what all the three-letter agencies are there for. So I wanted to just show you guys that because things haven't really changed much, and it's very scary that something from 2009 holds as much pertinence as it does today. And it's even more terrifying because we know for a fact that they still feel this exact same way about us. Anyway, thank you for listening to episode 262 of Backpacking America. It was a pleasure as always, and I will see you guys tomorrow, Friday at 10 p.m. for another episode.